This time on Watchers of Tomorrow, everything you know is a lie.
Hello everyone, welcome to Watchers of Tomorrow, the sci-fi review critique show that's putting the humanities back into science fiction. My name is Gep, and I'm joined as always by my friend and co-host Dr. Isix.
Hi.
This week is one of our group of 10 episodes. We are on episode 80, which is it's a lot.
We got a lot of episodes here. We're only like 20 away from 100. Holy smokes.
Yeah, well, we need to figure out if we're going to do something for that. I hadn't thought of that. Oof.
Maybe like a party episode.
Yeah, it's still a lot of weeks away, though. Like 20.
I'll think about this.
So if you are new to the show, oftentimes we do Star Trek things. Like if you came in, you saw the name of this episode, you're like, oh my god, I love that movie. We often do Star Trek things, but every 10 episodes, we want to break stuff up, so we do a movie or standalone something else. Well, mostly movies, but sometimes we talk about whether we'll do something that's a standalone something else, and then we just don't. So, yeah.
Maybe one of us will read a book at some point.
So this week, we alternate every time. Last time was my pick, so this week Isix has picked what is, I guess, a lot of people's favorite sci-fi movie.
It's a movie called DarkCity.
Released immediately before The Matrix in 1998. Engendering like many comparison videos on the internet.
Yeah, with the Matrix being like, trapped in a thing with computers, this is trapped in a thing with aliens.
Yeah, I mean they're not super similar. Like they have enough of a similar tone and some similar story beats that we'll get to, but like overall they're actually not that similar of movies, apart from a few more surface level things, though they did sell the sets from this movie to The Matrix.
Yes. Specifically like some of the rooftop bits where it's like, yeah, you remember that bit where they're running through there? And yeah, it's the same in both movies. Should I keep going?
Yeah.
So DarkCity is a film that was written and directed by Alex Proyas, who also did the screenplay. They also did movies like The Crow and Knowing. One of those is kind of good.
Yeah, The Crow. There was something else that I was surprised to learn. What was that? iRobot. Yeah, that. Oh my god.
Yeah. Now, I kind of like iRobot, but I don't think it should be titled that. But that's a whole other discussion. But yeah, they've done a few things. Some of it good, some of it not so good. And a whole bunch of other things I've never heard of before, like Songlines. I haven't, I guess, like a music video, maybe. But there's a whole list of people here that were part of the cast. There's also some other people that helped the screenplay, like Lem Dobbs, not Lou Dobbs, that's someone else entirely. David S. Goyer, and of course Alex, of course. Let's get to some of the actors here because we got
we've got a lot of actors. This happens with movies. You have actors that you've heard of.
Yes, like Kiefer Sutherland is playing Dr. Daniel Schreiber.
Like you don't recognize. Like when I saw when I was looking up stuff of the movies, like Kiefer Sutherland, who is he in this movie?
Yeah, he seems so different than like the main roles he's known for, because most people know him as that, got one guy from like 10 bazillion episodes of 24.
Yeah.
Which is, it's action star man, but he's not playing action man. He's basically the complete opposite, honestly. Who else do we got here? We got Rufus Sewell.
Sewell?
I'm not Sewell. He's most recently known for The Man in the High Castle, where he plays John Smith, who's a high-ranking SS officer. That's awkward. But yeah, he's been in a bunch of other things, different TV shows.
He was in The Legend of Zorro, A Knight's Tale.
Oh yeah, forgot about that. It's like, I think I remember seeing The Knight's Tale after DarkCity. It's like, wait, it's that guy. Yeah, Legend of Zorro, a bunch of other things. Who else do we got here? We got William Hurt, who was in the all-important movie, also from the 90s, of Lost in Space.
Came out the same year as this. He was basically filming both simultaneously.
If you're really into 1998 sci-fi movies, he's the guy to look up.
Yeah, I know. I saw him in this. It's like, oh, definitely a sci-fi movie. Hi, William Hurt.
He was also in the TV adaptation of Dune on the Sci-Fi Channel, I think it was.
Yes, he played Lord
Atreides, yes.
Atreides, yeah.
He was Kojak and The Accidental Tourist. I remember that. Weird movie. He's also in some Avengers movies of some sort that you probably never heard of, but
That was a weird trivia thing. Amazon has that trivia thing when you're watching movies on there. And it just had this thing. It's like, both William Hurt and Jennifer Connelly were in movies about the Incredible Hulk.
Yep.
Also Jennifer Connelly.
Yes, so Jennifer Connelly, who is, I guess, known best for Labyrinth.
Probably best known for Labyrinth and the drug movie that I'm blanking on for some reason now.
Requiem for a Dream.
Requiem for a Dream, there we go.
I hate that movie. I just can't stand it.
I like it, but it's deliberately uncomfortable.
Yeah, it's like, I just hate all the characters in this movie. I want it to end. Go away.
I first saw her in Rocketeer, and then it was a pretty big shock to see her in Requiem for a Dream after that.
It's a little different, yes. She was also in a few other things, including dun 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 Snowpiercer, the TV series.
That's not even out yet.
Yeah, so it's like maybe some of it's come out. I don't know, but most of that's not coming out until like next year. So she was also in Spider-Man: Homecoming. Huh, didn't notice that. Anyway. A couple more folks let's mention real quick. We got Ian Richardson, who plays Mr. Book. He's a sort of older gentleman who's in a whole bunch of things starting from the 60s. Most of these I don't remember, like Midsummer's Night's Dream is Shakespeare adaptation.
Yeah. I mean, older Scottish actor, so things of that era, good old stage and screen gravitas.
Also in Brazil.
Apparently it was in House of Cards in 1990.
Highlander TV series in 97.
And finally, probably somebody that you're more familiar with.
Yeah, Richard O'Brien. Or also known as Richard O'Brien. Who is best known for his role as Riff Raff of the Rocky Horror Picture Show.
So I was looking up cast interviews for this movie, and I didn't find a lot of interesting stuff, but they had one of those, pre-movie interview trailers where like all the people are just basically describing their characters. Mm-hmm. And you have the one guy who's like, he lost his memory and he has to go figure stuff out. And then the other guy's like, I play a scientist who does whatever. And Richard O'Brien comes and is like, my character is called Mr. Hands because, as you can see, my hands are quite long.
Yeah, pretty much. No, Richard O'Brien is kind of amazing like that. Yeah, he just knows how to be sufficiently creepy when the role calls for it, which is very fitting with the character in this movie.
Yes.
So, anything else we should poke at before we get rolling?
I don't think so. There was a little tiny thing about the reason that this movie seems to have so many screenwriters and various story buys and whatever is apparently that Alex Torres kind of wrote a nonsensical script. He wrote a script for movie people, and everyone's like, this is unfilmable. We're going to get some people in here to fix this.
And so we got the end product, which is actually the version that I watched. But there's also apparently a director's cut that changes a couple things. I guess most noticeably the opening narration, which is present in the version I watched.
Yeah, and we're going to get to that, but the opening narration is awful and unnecessary and actually ruins a lot of the dramatic buildup of any part of the movie.
Indeed, so I kind of skip over in my synopsis.
Makes sense to me. Well, should we jump in?
All right, let's jump right into it, to DarkCity. So, with some opening narration spoiling basically the whole premise of the movie, we sweep down onto a dimly lit city. We see Dr. Schreber, who's checking his watch. The busy, bustling city around him suddenly stops, and everyone passes out, including those waiting in line for a movie called The Evil. This is just a small detail I thought it was relevant to mention.
At the stroke of midnight.
At the stroke of midnight.
Well, 12.
After a spiral-filled title sequence, we find ourselves in a hotel room with a man in the bathtub. He had a little bit of blood on his forehead as he wakes up with a start. He stumbles about and checks the mirror. He gets dressed and goes to the main room of the hotel. As he does, he knocks over a fishbowl. But he puts the fish in some water to save its life, so keep it alive. It's good. We also pass by some sort of broken syringe on the floor. Really ominous. He finds a set of keys and a suitcase. The case has a postcard for Shell Beach inside. The man has flashes of memory from before the phone rings. On the other end is Dr. Schreber, warning him that his memory was erased in an experiment and that people are coming for him. The man drops the phone as he notices a body in the corner of the room, a woman with spirals carved in her flesh. The man flees as a group of strangers arrive via the elevator. He flees downstairs and notices everyone's asleep. There's a ding, and the hotel manager wakes up to berate him about, our protagonist, identifying our protagonist as Mr. Murdoch. Ledger says J. Murdoch specifically. The manager also mentions that Murdoch's wallet is at the automat. Murdoch goes to the pier to toss the suitcase as the manager checks out the room. The manager runs into the group of pale and creepy strangers, one of whom is a child. They are looking for Murdoch. The manager, being kind of useless, is put to sleep with just a word. That word is sleep. A lady, Emma, sings in a club. After, she gets informed that Schreber wants to talk to her. She goes to Schreber's place and finds him playing with rats in a circular maze. Schreber, I'm going to keep mispronouncing that, claims that her husband has suffered some sort of psychotic break and might have memory loss and might be delusional, he might be dangerous. So, if you see him, give me a call.
Well, he keeps running a rat through a spiral maze like it's some sort of metaphor or something.
Yes. Yeah, where's the exit? Which way's out? After Murdoch trying to get to guess his name in the street, we're introduced to Inspector Bumstead, who's playing a little accordion sort of thing there. And he gets a call to come investigate a murder. Murdoch goes to the automat, spots a woman outside, and proceeds to try to get his wallet back. But it's locked behind one of those little doors in the automat, because that's kind of how things work. He tries to force it open when some cops come in and gets nervous. Murdoch then focuses, and the door just kind of pops open. After the lady from outside helps him get past the cops, who seem interested in talking to him, he follows her back to her spot for, Bumstead ponders why he saved the fish but killed the girl. The chief inspector drops by to complain about the previous detective on the case, Walensky. Walensky then barges in, screaming about how there's no way out, man! Ah! Later, we see Walensky's messy office, which Bumstead needs to sort it through in order to catch up on the case. It's quite disgusting.
It's like conspiracy office. It's every conspiracy office. It's papers, there's bits of string connecting things, there's spirals drawn on everything.
There's bits of food and, various vermin sort of, under the papers, just piles of stuff everywhere. It's a complete mess. Emma then shows up and learns from Bumstead that her husband may have killed a bunch of ladies. She doesn't seem to like this and decides to leave. Using his wallet on himself, Murdoch figures out that his first name is John. Hooray! And he's with a woman. As she gets ready for a night of adventure, John asks her if she's maybe worried about that whole killing spree thing that's in all the news. But she's not concerned. He's not much of a killer after all. And he just kind of leaves. John then looks at the postcard for Shell Beach again, once more, and then spots a mechanical billboard advertising Shell Beach. Climbs up on the billboard, a little platform underneath it, and pulls out a stack of papers from his coat. And all these papers are newspaper clippings about these series of horrible murders. Then the strangers arrive. John's just like, who are you? They try to put him to sleep, but that doesn't quite work. So a fight breaks out involving knives. One of the strangers falls to the floorboards because it's all rickety and stuff. Then John kind of focuses on the floor and the hole expands, taking the other one down with him. Strangers note that he can tune before one of those that fell floats back up and takes a swipe at John. John falls and pulls a rope that then breaks the whole sign mechanical mechanism thing, and this big arm comes slicing down and chops one of the strangers' heads open. The rest of them flee, except John climbs up and inspects the body, and there's some sort of weird tentacle thing emerging from the top of the guy's head. It's really weird and creepy. Then John runs.
This is the world's most convenient fight scene.
Yes.
Like, I'm being attacked. Oh, they fell. Then I fell, but my falling also killed one of them. Hooray for me. I'm the hero.
So it's super convenient, but I guess none of them know how to fight properly. So, below the city, actually below the city, a whole bunch of the strangers are hanging out discussing rumors of a guy who could tune. One of the strangers from the fight, Mr. Hand, confirms that they saw how this guy is indeed different. Mr. Book shows up, who seems to be their leader, I guess, and he says he wants this John Murdoch. John returns to his apartment and surprises Emma. They argue, he acts confused, he mentions Schreiber, and she mentions that she had an affair and that sparked all this all off and he left and probably went on a killing spree, you know how it goes. Elsewhere, Schreiber is in a pool. Mr. Hand arrives to complain about the moisture and Schreiber not reporting in after, the night's activities. Schreiber says he was afraid that John woke up and and hadn't gotten much of what was in the actual syringe, so he doesn't have much of his memory. Mr. Hand then tells Schreiber, he wants a copy of John's memories for reasons. Back with John and Emma, she mentions the police are looking for him. John explains he tried to test himself earlier, so doesn't think he's a killer, so it can't be him, right? He then notices the police car outside, Bumstead's car specifically. Speaking of, Bumstead, is right outside the apartment as John tries to leave. John babbles about people being after him, and Emma kind of distracts the inspector, and a little bit of a chase starts up. John makes an amazing appearing and disappearing door act in order to flee the inspector, not quite realizing he may have influenced that door appearing and disappearing.
He's pretty good at intuiting the police and doing a bunch of parkour for a guy who doesn't even remember his own name.
I guess maybe he doesn't remember not being able to do this before, so he's just kind of doing it. But the detective does find Schreiber's card, which was left behind. During a taxi ride, John asks the cabbie about how to get to Shell Beach, because he's kind of interested in that place there. But the taxi cab driver can't quite remember. It's over there. It's one of those places. You don't know. Bumstead and Schreiber are talking together when John arrives quietly. They banter back and forth, and Schreiber seems to make a spot-on determination of Bumstead's complete personality. After they part, John follows the dock. Bumstead checks in with Linsky. He's having kind of a normal one, drawing spirals in his room and babbling about the lack of an exit. Also, his wife isn't his wife, apparently. He presses Bumstead about the past, but the inspector can't focus on it properly. Walensky mentions maybe they're dreaming this life and they'll wake up as somebody else someday. Also the case, there is no case. John follows Schreiber until the dock goes through a door that pops into existence for a few moments. Schreiber takes a fun ride to the lair of the strangers, where they're preparing a whole collection of personal items. The dock fills with some vials of liquid while remarking about adding ingredients, an unhappy childhood, teenage rebellion, and a death in the family. Mr. Book pops in to mentally suspend Schreiber over a pet, like telekinetic style. Schreiber speculates in his panic that maybe Murdoch is adapting, evolving or something, like given the strangers were looking for the human soul, maybe he's exactly what they wanted to find. Mr. Book is not too happy about this and explains how it's kind of absurd that John can just tune, given that it takes them several lifetimes in order to master it. So this is a little weird, but that's all Schreiber can get for him.
I do like the Schreiber thing. It's like, you were looking for the human soul. Maybe you found it and it's going to bite you in your... And then he gets levitated over the pit.
Yes. It's a good little exchange here. I love it. Later, the strangers gather. Mr. Book tells them to shut it down. Metal face of the clock inside pops open, and the clock within stops at 12.
Yeah, the strangers are really into aesthetics.
It's great.
Giant metal face that opens up to a big old-timey clock that just slowly ticks over to 12 o'clock and pauses.
So if I'm ever going to become a supervillain, I want one of those. Just so you know. So put it on the Christmas list. Check out. Do it, otherwise I'll destroy the moon. The clock stops, and so does everyone in the city. Except for John. John sees the city shutting down and tries to wake some people, but doesn't really have any luck. Mr. Book tells them to get to tuning. A big weird machine starts up and things start happening. Up in the city, buildings shift, change, morph, change size. All sorts of Madness around. The city shifts around John. The door to the below area pops in again, and some strangers emerge with Dr. Schraber. They also have got a sleeping guy over their shoulder, who they set up in a barber shop. John watches them use a syringe on the guy's forehead, imprinting him. We also see a working-class couple turning into an ultra-wealthy couple instead, by more imprinting and a little bit of a change of scenery. John finds Schreiber and gets a little pissed at him, using his tuning powers to knock the doc down. Schreiber explains that he can help John learn to control it, but John runs as Mr. Hand shows up. It's like, I'm out of here. The clock starts up again, as does the city, and Schreiber explains that John just kind of attacked him. He doesn't know what's going on. Seriously. Let's get back to work. Mr. Book gives instructions for the night's experiments, but there's a problem. They were unable to complete Avenue M due to an opposing force on the machines. Mr. Hand strolls in with Schreiber and the copy of John's memories. After some arguments, Mr. Hand gets imprinted with the memories John was supposed to get, the memories of a serial killer. Using the Shell Beach postcard and some help from the newspaper vendor, who used to be the hotel manager from earlier. Weird. John gets directions to his Uncle Carl's place. Strangers float through the city and find the woman John ran into earlier. He doesn't know where John is, though. Mr. Wall argues that with Mr. Hand about the point of this whole adventure. Mr. Hand thinks that they should look up Emma next before he pulls a knife and says, I need some time here still. Meanwhile, John spots the subway map of the city and the line that goes to Shell Beach. He starts a little bit of adventure on the subway, trying to get himself to Shell Beach, but doesn't really get anywhere. Then Walensky, the crazy man detective here, he shows up. It's going to be a big confrontation, Gepwin?
Yeah. I mean, one, this is just an accurate representation of what it's like trying to get anywhere on the subway for the first time. And and then they're going to have the same subway scene from The Matrix. Like, the main crazy guy showed up. They're going to have a fight in front of a train. There's slow motion, probably.
And so Walensky shows up, explains that everything in their world is a sham, and then he has figured out a way out. And so he jumps in front of the train, killing him. So I guess it was Walensky versus the train. Anyway, Mr. Hand and company track down Emma by the waterside. Mr. Hand is kind of all creepy as they chat, but she doesn't know where John is. But it's workable. Doesn't murder her. Emma, remembering what John said about testing himself, checks on the woman and finds her body. Bumstead finds Emma and they start looking for John together. Meanwhile, John breaks into Carl's place, and we meet Carl and his shotgun. But instead of John getting shot, he gets a slideshow about his childhood instead. John spots a photo with him having a scar, but he doesn't actually have a scar now. That's kind of weird. John then questions Carl about the clock. Is it AM or PM? And what happened to the day? Can't be midnight already. But Carl dismisses these questions like, don't worry about it.
Yes, it has not been daytime in the entire movie.
Nope. It's been dark the entire time. John also happens to find a book from his childhood, which he saw in one of the slideshows there that he'd been drawing in, but it's completely blank. Carl calls up Emma to tell her about John and him being a bit off, but gets caught by John making the phone call. On the other end of the phone call, Mr. Hand witnesses Emma's side of the conversation, so he picks up on what's going on, flies off, while Emma and Bumstead get in the car, and then midnight strikes and the city shuts down once more. Suddenly, we've got another chase scene. Though Murdoch pins Mr. Han for a few moments at the beginning of it to learn about the strangers, that they made the city, that they revise it each night to learn about the humans so they could be more like humans.
Yeah, well, I know they have a lot to get through every now and then. They just pin somebody and go like, tell me some exposition, and then they do for about 5 minutes and then move on.
And the little tentacle things inside their bodies, that's like the real them. And the person that you're looking at here, Richard O'Brien, that's actually a corpse that they're like piloting. It's kind of creepy. Then the building changes shape, and then as the chase is back on again, one stranger gets squished by a shifting building. John ends up hanging from an open door while the child stranger, Mr. Sleep, gnaws on his hand. John leaps out of the way onto a chimney and escapes. And then the city wakes up, but John gets cornered by Mr. Hand once more. But then a car pulls up. Inside is Bumstead and Emma. They pull him inside and drive off. Naturally, this leads to John being incarcerated. So he's now in custody and being interrogated by Bumstead. John asks Bumstead about how to get to Shell Beach, when was the last time he remembers the day, and similar other questions that don't really have any good answers. Bumstead gets a little pissed by all this. But then John gets his attention by making that book from earlier, from his childhood, float above the table. Ooh. John meets with Emma later, as one of those little divided meeting things for prisoners and things like that. He explains that she didn't cheat on him, that their minds have been messed with. And then he tunes the glass out of the way so they can kiss and gets dragged off.
Well, they have a central line here. This is what I love you. They can't fake something like that. And he goes, you're right. And then he mind explodes the glass.
Yes. Love is more powerful than the screwing with their heads. Strangers arrive at the precinct and start putting people to sleep. They grab the police chief and have him take them to Murdoch's cell. But Murdoch's missing, so they kill the police chief. John finds Schreiber at the pool and demands some answers. Schreiber mentions the strangers not really liking water, and then he pulls a gun on John. Whoops. He holds up a syringe and demands that John inject himself with it. Bumstead, who sprung John from jail, shows up and pulls a gun on Schreiber. John takes the syringe and hides it in his coat. Remember that for later, kids. The trio go for a trip, heading towards Shell Beach. Schreiber is very unhappy about this. Once they go from car to boat, Schreiber then explains more about the experiments and the strangers, and their interest in individuality. That the strangers share some sort of group memory of some sort. Also, they're all dying and think that humanity can help them not die. Strangers also use machines below the city to shape it, to create it, to build it, and to focus their powers. But even with a library of memories and all the mechanisms, they still need an artist to put things together. So they make use of Schreiber, who got to keep the skills as a scientist, but had to erase everything else in his memory. So Schreiber doesn't know where they came from, who he is, who any of them are, and everything before the city came to be is completely lost. They arrive at the door to Shell Beach, inside a ruin. And beyond is a sign for Shell Beach, a big advertisement, paper on the wall. Schreiber explains that there is no ocean, that there's nothing beyond the city. So John and Bumstead, getting a little frustrated by this, get to work tearing down the literal wall, hammers and mind powers and all that. Beyond the wall is a starfield. Space. Outer space! Then Mr. Hand and his posse arrive. Bumstead shoots a couple of them before falling out of the city wall, and along with one of the strangers, and they kind of float off into space. Bye, Bumstead.
We do get to see his point of view for a bit, and get to see the entire city just floating there in a giant spiral.
Yes, and so the images of the spirals and the maze, the rat, all that kind of comes together. That is the city. And who comment that from Walensky that there is no way out? Kind of true. Mr. Hand, who has Emma at knife point, demands that John surrender. Mr. Hand then forces John to sleep. He's like, okay, I guess you're kind of surrendering. You can go to sleep now. Okay. One ride to the underworld later, John arrives in the strangest playground, strapped down to a big wheel table thing. Mr. Sleep starts to chant to kill him. Remember, Mr. Sleep's a little child, so he's like, kill him. And then they all start yelling it. It's creepy. Mr. Book halts that call for death and explains that it's time to move on to the final phase of their experiments. Time to become one with John Murdoch. Mr. Book hands Schreiber a syringe filled with dark fluid before calling for the shutting down of the city. Shut it down forever. Well, they're distracted by doing that. Schreiber straps John's head down to the table and grabs the syringe that John had hid in his coat, the one that Schreiber tried to inject him with earlier. He injects John with it and gives John all the answers. And he leaves the stranger's memories aside for now. John experiences life, but with Dr. Schreiber in his memories explaining a whole bunch of things. A lifetime of knowledge and skill in a single syringe, and memories in fluid form. How to tune fully and how to use the machines of the strangers against them if he so chooses. Mr. Book spots the unused syringe and asks Schreiber, hey, what's up? John wakes up from his memory adventure and gets off the table like some sort of badass. Just sort of like, I'm going to move the table with my mind and then kind of walk off of it.
And melt it.
Yes. It kind of fades away behind him. He starts tuning up a storm as the strangers run around kind of in a panic. Mr. Book slaps him with his mentality, and John strikes back, and there's a big face-off with DBZ psychic blast power energies going at each other. This causes havoc everywhere around them, and lots of strangers are knocked around and are killed, or flying off into who knows where. Eventually the face-off ends and there's an explosion, and floating and flying, and buildings grinding out of the city as strangers are flung into the air, and everything kind of goes everywhere for a minute. One explosion on the surface later, and Schreiber lands alive and safe on some rubble. Hooray! John and Mr. Book fly up into the city, all like more DBZ style, I guess. Book throws a knife at John. Oh no, but John mind catches it. Book tries to force it into John's head, but John's tuning is stronger, and he sends it right back into Mr. Book's throat. John then lifts a water tower into the tumbling Mr. Book, who then collides with it. The tower explodes, and the creature within Mr. Book, paled, dying Mr. Book, pops out into the open and the water, and it disintegrates. John lands. Schreiber explains that Emma was re-imprinted to John, and the memories of the storage place were kind of destroyed, so she's not really Emma anymore. So, yeah, sorry about that. John says that, I'm going to go fix things now. He's going to restart the city. And the clocks start again as water pours out of the side of the city. Soon there's a whole big ring of water around the city in deep space there. It's being held in by the force bubble or something, I guess. John then heads off to Shell Beach so he can get to rebuilding the city around him as he goes. Emma wakes up as Anna. She leaves her job and gets on a bus. Some more tuning later, there's a peninsula jutting out of the side of the city with a seacoast town and lighthouse. John gets to the door to Shell Beach that they had visited before, and Mr. Hand arrives. Mr. Hand is dying because John's memories don't quite agree with him, but he wants to know what it felt like to be John Murdoch. John comments that, maybe what they're looking for isn't in their head. Maybe to look in the wrong place. The city moves and shifts, and slowly there's finally sunlight on the dark city. John opens the door and sees the sun, and a pier, and Anna. John listens to her talk about it being so bright. He asks her about Shell Beach. She directs him to the peninsula, jutting off the city wall, just to the side. He mentions that she's heading that way herself, so maybe we should go together. The end!
That's such a fun, good movie.
Yes. So there's a lot in there, but there's whole mysteries on mysteries, and it's like, okay, so we got a murder mystery, and there's weird creepy guys here. Are they the murderers and the secret murderers, and kind of, but also not really? And oh my god.
Yeah, apparently, if you haven't seen this, apparently there's a director's cut that's better. The intro commentary, the voiceover that they give is just, there's aliens that abducted a bunch of people and they mess with our memory. It explains the entire plot, and then the movie tries to build up this mystery.
So if you get the non-director's cut, just fast forward a few seconds till after the first pause there.
Yeah, just go to the credits scene sequence.
Yes. Yeah, or mute it until that point. Either one works, because then you get a much better experience overall.
So what's interesting with this, I remember this movie, and I remember really, really liking it. And watching it again, I still really like it. And I'm trying to figure out why. So what is it that made you want to pick this one?
Well, I guess part of the reason was that when I first heard about it, I was very kind of into the aesthetics of it, that this movie sort of presents. This sort of dark noir, weird stuff going on at the same time sort of thing. So not quite Lovecraftian, though there are tentacle monsters, but very much I'm not sure how to otherwise describe it, honestly.
Well, it is a dark sci-fi, not cyberpunk because it doesn't have the neon and things, but that kind of gritty punk aesthetic mixed with a lot of noir aesthetics in what they described as a timeless city. So it's a generalized city. It's very obviously New York-y, but that takes elements from anywhere between the 1940s and 70s and just kind of mashes them all together.
Different building styles, different sort of, ways things work. The automat's very 40s, 50s sort of thing there. The hotel where he wakes up is this big marquee thing out front. And, that's kind of the only neon you see. And it's sort of this weird mashup that's, everything's sort of cloaked in shadow as well. And so everything has sort of a nightmarish quality to it that is, could be anything sort of creeping out there in that city. Everything's sort of, you're both cozy, but exposed at the same time. Does that make sense?
The city was intentionally off-putting, which fit with their noir aesthetic really well. The something weird to me was I basically noticed it at the time because the movie feels like it moves really, really, really fast. But apparently this movie like holds the current record for average cuts per second.
Huh.
Because it cuts on average every 1.6 seconds.
Well, I guess to a certain degree, especially with like the memory recall bits, which I didn't go into much detail in the synopsis there. It's very like, okay, here's like not even half a second of footage, and then you immediately go into a different memory, a different bit of different scene there. But even if you count those out, there's still a lot of fast stuff going on here. Like when John's trying to figure out what his first name is, like John, James, Justin, Jeff. It's just sort of cutting back and forth between him, sort of walking different directions with each name.
Yeah, it's very disorienting, and it's good to get you into kind of the disorientation of the character with losing your memory and trying to piece everything together.
I guess my energy today is sort of reflecting that to a certain degree.
I just thought it was interesting because I still really enjoyed the movie, and I think a lot of it is stylistic because I was watching it trying to be very critical to think of things to bring up in the episode. They have like one or two ideas in here, but they don't really explore them or comment on them in any way. They're just kind of a hanging device for the plot.
Like the why of this particular sort of setup?
Yeah, like why are the aliens have almost no motivation for what they're doing?
The unknowable motivation.
They keep commenting on like, they're trying to find out what makes humans human, but the movie doesn't really do any particular exploration of that, aside from mentioning that they're looking in the wrong place. But what does that even mean? Like, it gives you some things to think about, but the movie isn't really exploring the ideas in itself.
I guess to a certain extent, the strangers, the aliens there, are sort of intentionally kept a certain amount of mystery to them, even in the non-director's cut. That there is, the ideas that were sort of posed about what they're actually looking for are coming from human perspectives that have also had their memories erased or messed with. So what's the actual truth there? Is this actually looking for, quote, the human soul? Or is that just sort of his best guess for Dr. Schraber?
Yeah, it's kind of vague on there. Since you mentioned Schraber, though, something that I stumbled on when I was looking through this, Schraber is named after a
German jurist
who lived in the 1800s.
Yes, 1842 to 1911. I might have a Wikipedia article open here.
Yeah. And he wrote a pretty famous book that was like a seminal work of psychology that was interpreted by Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung.
Memories of My Nervous Illness. And I cannot pronounce the German version.
Yeah, so he had basically a psychotic break and a lot of hallucinations and things and wrote a book during that.
I guess there was technically a subtitle that kind of, was questioning, like, being imprisoned for this sort of thing, because he was kind of put in an asylum for a while.
And one of the interesting things with this is he wanted, according to some of the stuff I was reading anyway, he wanted to write the book not necessarily to, like, document what it was like having this mental experience, which was part of it, but that the mental experience itself gave him a feeling of profound truths he had learned about the universe that he needed to share with people.
I got the answers now. It's pretty great, guys. So there's like God and like the forces in heaven and these nerve connections and divine race thing going on, right?
Yeah, and it's actually really interesting. Like you can't read the whole thing. There's like a 100-page preview, but it's really chopped up on one of the Google things that I was skimming. And so there's some interesting stuff in there.
I guess a little hard to buy though, but he still wanted to get his message out. So here, have a book. So that's the origin of Dr. Schraber's name there. So do you want to talk about the interpretations of that whole experience there he had?
I mean, the interpretations in the time period were like very predictable.
Yeah, like, oh, this is your mother and this is your father and bye.
Freud thought it was latent homosexual repression, like Freud does. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, part of Schraber's things he mentioned was having was it dreams or something like that about being having sexual relations like as a woman.
Well, I think God made him pregnant or something.
Oh, okay, I missed that part. And so I guess it's very easy for Freud's like, oh, this is clearly what's going on. We don't have to think about this very hard at all.
Mm-hmm.
Folks that came by later that suggested that some of the stuff he talked about was remembering things from his childhood that his parents might have did, his dad.
Oh yeah, this guy had like the worst father.
Yeah. You must discipline children to make them productive members of society by doing all this horrible stuff to them.
Well, the guy was a well-renowned child rearing expert.
In, the 1800s for how scary that is.
Yeah, so he had things of like strapping children upright in chairs for proper posture. Children should be unwaveringly obedient to their parents, including infants.
If your child is crying, that's a problem. It means they're probably hungry. No, it means they're disobeying you. This sort of thing, I always remember that one episode of The Simpsons where they bring in these posture-correcting chairs to eliminate slouching by the year 3000. They look like torture devices. So Schraber kind of had a rough time, both as as a child and when he got older with his mental situation there. And he eventually died while being held. Correct?
I think so. Which, I mean, a lot of people did. A lot of the asylum system was not amazing.
Kind of the place you put people to make them just not be part of your life anymore.
They got overcrowded and things. The original plan of that kind of system wasn't bad. It was like give people a nice, calming environment filled with nature. Mm-hmm. And then they just got mismanaged and overcrowded.
Yep. And so suddenly this being around nature is being around everyone else who wanted to be here or was put here or.
So I had like 3 ideas for this, and I don't know what you want to get to. There's an interesting thing around the getting back to nature thing as it relates to cities, or the movie is all about memory, so we could talk about those for a bit, or
why not both?
What is the human soul?
Well, let's start with the first 2. I'll have to think about the last one. So this movie basically takes place almost entirely in a built-up city sort of environment. There is no trees. There is no green space. There is nothing but buildings, streets, and sidewalks. And subways, I guess. And so the entire movie, John is looking for Shell Beach, this place that has grass, it has sea, it has open space, it has a few houses, but they're like not on top of each other or packed together. You're looking for, I guess, a more pastoral environment.
And a somewhat interesting thing, especially since the city is very New York-y, because that's where noir aesthetic kind of dictates things is in old-timey Manhattan.
Yep.
Shell Beach is Coney Island.
Yep.
The aesthetic, the look of the thing, the billboard, it's Coney Island.
The XP. So I've never been to Coney Island. How is it?
I have not either, actually. I've lived here for almost 10 years. I've still not been to Coney Island.
And right now might not be a very good time to do it either. So,
yeah.
So no first hand.
The interesting thing with having that kind of city aesthetic and the kind of central driving character motivation that we're given for our lead is to get out of the city and to Coney Island as an escape from the city, is that around the kind of the mid to late 1800s, especially in cities like New York, you had this kind of civil societal theory that a lot of the problems that you got in cities, the poverty and the crime rate and all of the things that rich people were worried about living here, were directly caused by living in the city itself.
So do we fix the city and hopefully that fixes the people? Or do we, put the people elsewhere?
A lot of people of the time, very famously a guy named Frederick Olmsted, who became a very, very influential park designer, decided that what we needed to do was introduce nature into cities. So he very famously created Central Park in Manhattan.
A big strip of land right down the middle of the island.
Which, a cynic might say, if you build a massive green space right on top of where a poor black community lives, suddenly all the poor people went somewhere. Well,
look at that. That thing that the rich people were all worried about is no longer here.
But also at the same time that that was happening, they were building some ways to get to Coney Island, which at the time was being built up. It turned into the city escape sort of area, and then it got a bunch of theme parks and things built on it and sideshow attractions and all the things that Coney Island is somewhat famous for today, even though a lot of that kind of dropped off and there's been a recent resurgence.
Theme park rides, things like that, yeah.
So the idea that the escape from the city is something that would be necessary for one's mental health is a very, very old idea and kind of stems from this basically blaming the lack of nature inside of cities for the societal problems of the city.
It's urban planning of the most level 0 sort, really.
And what's kind of interesting, you could read this movie from an urban planner perspective.
All of it, yeah.
Because the end of the movie is Murdoch basically becomes the ultimate urban planner.
He's now the super mayor.
His power is to remake the city.
Yeah, he literally says he's going to fix things. So you see bricks and mortar flying up and buildings reassembling themselves, and then he makes the Shell Beach and all that sort of stuff. It's very much he is changing the city based on the plan that he has, which is, I guess, to have Shell Beach.
Well, I guess it is kind of worth noting that the Shell Beach sort of aesthetic is not the erudite, sophisticated kind of getting out to nature. It's a very, this is what working class people would have gotten to, would have gone out to the beach and gone to the boardwalk and, had fun out there in these, weirdly integrated spaces for the time anyway, even though there were right next door to some of the more famous Coney Island beaches, there were, segregated areas for rich people that the places that wound up being famous were the main beach where all of the fair attractions and sideshows and gambling establishments were. That was weirdly integrated for the 1800s.
It's everybody's money's good here, so let's just have you guys hang out here. Give us more money, please. Spend it all here, please. I'm not in any way an expert on Coney Island, so I'm going to let you, if you have any other important details there, I'll let you put them in now.
Well, that was it. I barely knew anything about Coney Island, and I coincidentally stumbled upon a history thing the other day. It was oh, this seems relevant.
I'm sure Nella has done some videos about Coney Island at some point. She does good stuff. So, there is, I guess in the urban design sort of thing is, It kind of makes me wonder, okay, what is he going to be doing after the movie? Is that going to be it? Is he going to be changing the city in a massive fashion otherwise? It's not entirely clear, other than now we have sunlight.
Yeah, one of the things that would have been really interesting, this is an action sci-fi movie, so they ended it when the action part was done. But the actual, heady sci-fi part would have been the aftermath.
Yep.
What do you do with this artificial space that has all these people in it who have no idea who they are?
Yes, because, once again, everyone's experiences in this city have been fabricated. So do you just let the fabrications play out and hope things just kind of work out? Or is there going to be maybe some sort of, upcoming disaster if we don't change up something or let people in on the whole ruse of it? And so, do you try to let the artificial society continue as is, or do you start to try to change it in order to, save it from something horrible happening?
Well, there's definitely going to be some kind of disaster, because they said earlier on that the strangers have a massively longer lifespan than a human. They said that it takes several lifetimes to master their tuning. So having this one guy who's the only person that can interact with the machines that run the place with a human lifespan.
Yes. Hope they're not having kids, because otherwise it could be a problem.
Mm-hmm.
There was a couple kids in the rich people's, or working class people that became rich people's place.
Yeah, they showed kids. They showed both live kids and dead kids.
Yes. Interesting note, the child stranger is actually played by two different actors.
Yeah.
Twins.
I guess it's not uncommon when you're dealing with younger child actors.
So that's an interesting bit of trivia there. Corpses. Don't walk around in them, guys. It's creepy.
So should we go on to amnesia and memory things?
Yeah, let's go and move on. Otherwise, we're going to talk about Richard O'Brien some more. Because apparently Mr. Hand's role was written for him.
Yes, very specifically. And also the kids who played Mr. Sleep were big fans of Rocky Horror Picture Show.
So they got to hang out. It's pretty sweet.
Yeah. So the memory thing, it's very interesting because they basically present the main character as what you'd basically call an amnesiac. He can't remember anything about his life. But as we know from a lot of examples of this, and we're getting a lot of information from Oliver Sacks' books, who writes a lot of very famous, well-known psychology, anecdotal psychology books about interesting people that he's worked with, including a lot of people who have one form of amnesia or another, because there's a multitude of different ways you can develop amnesia. And if you can forget everything, you can have something called transitory amnesia, where you just forget stuff for a few hours and then you're back normal and doesn't affect the rest of your life at all. You can remember your past, but not form new memories. You can forget your past and form new memories. There's just a massive multitude of amnesia types.
Kind of sucked to have like multiple types at the same time. Like I can remember everything between when I turned 28 and then nothing after 35.
Well, there was like one guy who just like kept reliving this. Like he didn't relive it, but like get updated on what was going on every day, get reminded that he was living in a new time, but then every day he woke up and thought it was like 1930 something.
That would be a little disorienting, yes.
Mm-hmm. The really, really interesting things that you get with the studying of amnesia is there seem to be a lot of different kinds of memory. Because what you're usually dealing with amnesia is episodic or autobiographical memory.
So the what, who, what, where, whens.
So like even Murdoch in this movie, he can't remember his name. He doesn't know where he's from, who he is, his childhood, yada. He knows how to speak English. He knows how to walk. He knows how to avoid the police. He even winds up smoking at one point.
I guess I'm a smoker, so I'm going to smoke because I got the compulsion and don't remember how to do this. I remember, or it just seems like it makes sense or something like that. Sort of the smoker's compulsion. Strikes.
And there is something where you lose the ability to speak. You could say that you kind of forget how to talk, but it's not considered amnesia. It's a different thing I'm forgetting the term for right now. So you can basically lose the ability to speak. You forget how. It's not exactly forgetting. You lose some sort of connection that lets you connect concepts to words.
So there's sort of like a hardwired structural skill sort of memory and memories that are, the autobiographical sort of stuff.
Well, the interesting thing is it's not hardwired at all.
Mm-hmm.
So what they were describing in one of these things was procedural memories, which is your memory basically of how to do stuff, like how to do things in order. One of the anecdotes from this one book is a guy who was a composer, musician, conductor. He could just do a lot of amazing music stuff. Got basically total amnesia, didn't really remember his past, could not form new memories. If you put him down in front of the piano and gave him sheet music and told him to play it, he could play it. But he didn't remember that he knew how to read music or play music.
So it was still in there somehow. It was just not quite expect himself to remember it.
But also, this is not just you have the skills that you had when you became amnesiac, because they also practiced new skills with him. And he learned the new skills, even though he had absolutely no memory of practicing them.
And they were still being able to create some sort of memory, just not all the memory.
Yeah, and there was a guy who, like, for example, if you asked him how you make a cup of coffee, he wouldn't be able to tell you. Or like asked him, where do you keep the coffee? Where are the mugs? He couldn't remember. If you asked him to make a cup of coffee, he'd go to the kitchen and make a cup of coffee.
Yep. I guess this kind of reminds me of, how in some fiction they express, it's like, yes, you have the power to psychically bend this thing, but you don't try to bend the spoon. No, that's impossible. Just remember that it's time for it to bend, and then it bends.
Yeah, stop trying so hard. The final thing, just as this one was really fascinating, is a woman who couldn't form new memories, and one visiting psychologist went to shake her hand and concealed a pin in his hand and pricked her on the hand. And then the next time he was there, he showed up a couple more times, and she wouldn't shake his hand, even though she couldn't remember the event. And when they asked her about it, she would either say, well, can't I not shake someone's hand if I want to? And then eventually, sometimes hands contain pins. So you are forming new memories. You're learning new things. You are still gaining information about the world. You are still, learning. That one is what they were calling a emotional memory or an implicit memory, like something connected to an emotional response, like a trauma reaction.
Yeah.
And those can continue going, even though your narrative memories seem to no longer be functioning.
And we've talked a bit about how narrative memory is to a certain extent sort of associative. When you are directly asked the questions, how do you make this cup of coffee? You kind of dig back and then present to yourself the whole procedure, as opposed to when you're actually doing it, you're to a certain degree on autopilot. Your skill is proceeding as it has been practiced.
Yes, your memories aren't like a scanner, like that just takes information, sets it out. The best description that I've ever heard, which I'll repeat for anyone who hasn't heard whichever show that was, 15 something episodes ago.
Yeah.
It's like, if you take a digital photograph of a building, it takes every single line of the building and assigns it a position and a color and then recreates it that way. So every single detail of the building is represented. If you were remembering a building, you go, well, there was a corner there, a corner there, a corner there, a window here. It was made largely of brick. There you go.
I guess in some ways it's sort of like taking the Fourier transform of a situation. You break it down to a few key important details, so then you can reconstruct the rest of it. But if you're unable to reconstruct that in a sort of conscious fashion, you're not able to explain it to somebody else, even if you still have the memories inside you.
And there's plenty of things with like people who had temporary amnesias that just happen. It's just a thing that can happen. It's very, very, very rare. Sometimes it happens to like someone once in their lifetime. It seems to be very unharmful, but you just can't form memories for a couple hours. Happened to one guy while he was doing a gallbladder surgery.
Whoops.
And he like kept asking if he'd taken the gallbladder out and what he was doing there and why he was there. But like the nurse who was assisting him saw that he could still do the surgery. He was still doing everything he needed to. So she just coached him the rest of the way through it. It went fine. Patient lived. He had no memory of performing the surgery.
Yeah. That'd be a little unsettling. It's like, wait, what's going on here? My hands are inside somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And not quite the thing you want to be, sort of coming into.
So this interesting idea that like you're messing with someone's memory to try to find the essential themness of the person, but like we don't know how memory works. We have this one form of memory. What we focus on is memory, but obviously all the other stuff could be considered memory too.
I guess sort of thinking back to the movie, to a certain degree, they seem to be generally keeping up how people's relationship to each other, in a sort of, constant-ish sort of fashion. If they, the couple that was, sort of more working class suddenly becoming much more well off, they're still together. They could have been pulled apart and, put somewhere else entirely. But so maybe in the movie, they're sort of making use of that emotional connection sort of memory as they sort of change around the details on top of that.
Or possibly it's the thing they don't understand that they're trying to get around, or they have some sort of implicit misunderstanding of how things work that makes them unable to even formulate a proper experiment based on our psychology.
Maybe the strangers don't know what the hell they're doing, and they're just kind of flailing around in the dark.
But that gets to the actual thing that I think could be interesting, is at least a brief discussion, because, there's several philosophical veins of thought around this issue, but nothing, like, of course we haven't come up with an actual concrete answer for this, and this seems to be the thing that the movie itself wants to explore, even though it isn't really trying to come up with much of a definition of this either. What is it that makes a person that person?
The essential element of the you, because the strangers themselves, are mentioned to have sort of group consciousness, that they lack a sense of individuality, even if like each individual one seems to have a personality.
Yeah, and I'll go over very quickly the three kind of dominant philosophical veins of thought here, with very brief synopsis. The continuity of memory, basically you are the same person that you used to be because you remember that person who you used to be, and you remember all the steps that got you from there to here.
A to B to C, and hope you never sleep.
You also have the kind of body theory, which is you are your body no matter what's in there. So you're the same body that you used to be. So because the body itself has remained contiguous, you have remained contiguous.
So don't lose too much skin cells too quickly.
Then you also wind up with identity itself is an illusion that we have placed upon reality and does not in fact exist.
So your entire brain function is a waveform that can be technically associated with all wave functions of the universe. So don't worry about it.
Yeah, well, the you from yesterday, there's no particular concrete reason that's still the you now.
You're just using that guy's memories. The thing that was he or she or whatever, or neither one. That person that was you before is dead. It's gone, but there's leftovers that you can make use of.
To paraphrase the Terry Pratchett novel Thief of Time, I remember yesterday, but the memory is in my head now. Did yesterday really happen, or is it only the memories that exist?
I think we're touching on some Apollos hypothesis here a little bit.
Also, I'm not going to stop recording because this is just random, but there seems to be a fireworks show happening in my neighborhood. It's a summer thing in Brooklyn, so I apologize if there's explosion noise.
So, they're just celebrating Dark City, you know?
Yeah.
They're really excited. Word I just butchered trying to pronounce here is a sometimes derided as last Thursdayism, which is sort of the cosmic version of that, where everything that was actually created last Thursday or 5 minutes ago, and it just happens that you remember all this stuff, and that previous existence never happened. It just you think it does. Sort of, it's an illusion of sorts.
And you have no particular way of knowing this.
It's unverifiable and untestable. So it's one of those things I don't really worry about.
Yeah, I think that the central thing does come into how we interact with the world and each other. There's a very famous kind of thought experiment with this that is ancient Greek. So I guess I should mention the ancient Greek thing, that kind of one of the older theories I could find, because we didn't start recording philosophy until ancient Greece in the Western world. I'm sure there's older stuff and other stuff, but one of the older kind of soul ideas I could find, because it's pretty well accepted even in a non-religious sense that the whatever essential you-ness that exists is referred to as the soul, not necessarily implying a religious context.
Ultimate element, that ideal of the soul.
And as far as I can tell, one of the oldest ideas of something soul or soul adjacent comes from ancient Greece, and the kind of Platonic idea of the thing that is you that is unchangeable.
The immutable self, the psyche in a word.
And that kind of leads to this fairly famous sort of thought experiment, also kind of ancient Greek, which is if you take the Argo and it needs repairs, and you replace the sail, and then you replace the rudder, and then you replace the mast, and then you replace the planks one by one, eventually you've replaced every part of the boat. So is it the same boat?
Good question. How do you define boat?
I was discussing this with someone, and I think we came up with a pretty useful idea that something maintains the continuity for ourselves. Because the way that humans, this is really about how we are interacting with the world. So you could say that the boat has a soul because it has a thing that we have assigned it a meaning. The boat has a meaning. We look at this boat, we associate the meaning, we go, this boat carries the meaning of the Argo. And that meaning stays with the boat, even if the parts get replaced, because we have associated that meaning with the boat for ourselves.
So it's a majority association with this bit of matter, even as parts of it are slowly interchanged with other bits.
It's not even necessarily a majority. It can be even like a single person can say, this is my knife, and nobody else cares about this thing, but it's still mine, even if I replace the blade and the handle.
Very much a sort of a construct that we are sort of applying to a arrangement of items, an arrangement of objects. And so, again, when you're kind of turning this back onto the self, that's kind of how we just sort of implicitly treat it most of the time.
I was thinking that we've tied this in a lot with how we relate to not only the universe around us generally, but also human relationships, because relationships to us are so fundamentally important, and you can't maintain relationships without that kind of continuity.
What is a friendship if you're not with someone constantly forever?
Yeah.
These ideas that we construct as far as our interactions go that are much larger than a very, I guess, fundamental definition of this thing is this and it is pure and immutable. It is something that is separate that we cannot hope to sort of pull apart, and it will always be there because it is always this and it's unchanging. Things are a little more, I guess, soft than that, but they are still sort of being generated from us internally.
And what's really interesting, especially when you're interacting with other people, we put a lot of this emphasis on the emotional and procedural memory, less so on the narrative memory. Because when you hang out with a friend you haven't seen in a long time, it's oh, they still act the same. They still do this the same way. I remember how they smile or how they laugh or how they make this thing. And if that drastically changes because of something else that was going on in their lives, you go like, oh, you don't act like the same person anymore.
Something has happened. Just should I be concerned? Should I be angry? Should I be something else? You sort of have a complicated reaction when that happens, and you might not be able to get the same enjoyment as you had before, and that's kind of sad.
Mm-hmm. This is kind of getting into a difference between like a Cartesian way of philosophy, which is kind of items exist and carry an implicit true meaning with themselves, and all of the meaning we find in the universe is learning about the actual like external truths around us.
So where you are in the Cartesian plan. Got it.
And a phenomenological philosophy, which is the meaning that an object carries is not implicit to the object, but is brought to the object, colored by your own experiences with it.
So the quantum mechanics version.
Sort of, yeah. Your interaction with the object changes how you feel about the object. There was a pretty good, concise example I just read, which is a kid looks at a candle flame, goes, "That is pretty, I want to touch it." And they touch it, and they get burned. And now, instead of seeing it as pretty, they see it as hostile.
Mm-hmm. It's now a danger.
Not because they learned something about that flame, like... People would look at that and go like, well, the kid didn't know it was hot and now they know it's hot. But for the child themselves, it actually just completely changed the way that they perceive fire. The meaning that they take from seeing the object has altered.
That's not the specific data points, but the overall impression.
Which is an interesting one because it does spread. It's not just, hey, now you know that this candle's hot. But like, if you're only doing it Cartesianally, maybe that candle's not hot because you haven't tested that candle.
So you have to test all the candles now.
This one is your implicit understanding of fire itself as a meaning has changed.
I'm suddenly reminded of that. I think it's XKCD comic where it's like different people testing, like touching an object that's like has electric shock on it, and like the scientist will keep trying to touch it to make sure it still gives you a shock, because it could change its state. It could become not a burning candle that hurts you when you touch it. It could be something that makes you feel good instead. So I have to keep touching it then. Mm-hmm. More data.
So a lot of what we're bringing to this is kind of our understanding of someone else's continuity or another object's continuity. We still ascribe the same meaning to the object or the person, even though, like, maybe intellectually we know that the last time I saw this person was however many years ago, and, biologically all your cells change over and they've had a lot more experiences and they're completely different now. But because I carry that meaningful continuity through, they're still the same person.
I guess kind of going back to the movie then, is Anna and Emma the same person?
Well, see, that's the thing that they get with the movie is they want to imply that she is, but they don't want to explore whether she is.
Because it's right at the end of this movie. It's like, she's Anna now. Okay, this could be awkward, but John's going to try to get friendly with her all the same.
Well, I did enjoy that she was just there. Like, she was just kind of drawn to the place herself. He didn't go in and go like, now I shall have a relationship with this woman because I found her hot before.
It's like, well, I'm going to go to Shell Beach because it seems like a neat place.
And they leave it a little bit open on whether she's being friendly or she still has feelings for him.
You sort of, interpret it as you like, really.
Though it's still a little bit shitty how they treated her as a character because she,
generally,
you could remove her from the story and make absolutely no difference to what was going on.
I guess there's maybe one or two plot points she's kind of needed for, but not even really then if you just change a couple other things.
It also unfortunately falls into that same noir trope of treating sex workers very, very horribly.
Yep. It's like, well, you're selling your body, so we have to treat you like an object. Uh-oh.
Well, in fact, the first person who shows up is she's the first person who's nice to him in the entire story. Mm-hmm. And then later they're like, well, we put her there to die and she hasn't died, so she has to die.
Dang it, Mr. Hand, why do you have to be a murderer? I guess he programmed himself to be that way. Whoops.
And they never actually go into exploring whether or not, Murdoch would have become a murderer if they'd completed the memory thing, or what he was before this.
Well, to a certain extent, that is kind of the question that the strangers are asking, but we as the audience aren't supposed to be necessarily, exploring that.
Yeah.
That the exploration of that whole question is maybe beside the point. That it is something else entirely. That is, not the right move to be even sort of, doing. Not even the right question to be asking. I have to think about this some more.
Yeah, I've been recently, like, I just started a Buddhism book, and a lot of the central things is, like, stop trying not to be scared of things, and stop trying so hard.
You don't have to necessarily break everything down to its finest components. You can take a bigger view of things and just sort of let it flow through you. I guess it's kind of more of the point of the movie. Independent of what John would have ended up doing if he had all the memories he was supposed to get, the answer to if he would have kept killing or not is not an important answer to have.
I thought it was interesting, and I do not mean this as a criticism of the movie, because I really, really enjoy the movie for its tone and how it's putting things out. It's a very good movie. But I thought it was interesting that so many people cite this as either their favorite or one of their favorite movies, even though it falls into, like, every narrative problem that people usually cite with why they dislike movies.
Yep. It's like, this was really convenient that this thing happened like this.
Yeah.
This relationship is here.
It's overly convenient. It's filled with plot holes. The antagonists have basically no motivation beyond being antagonists. The protagonist is a completely neutral non-entity who has things happen to him the entire time and has no actual, like, influence on the story itself.
To a certain extent, it's about his journey to getting that kind of influence, even though it's kind of given to him.
Yeah, it's given to him by another character, and it's like, okay, you're God now.
All right, I'm God. Sweet. Now I'm also having flashbacks to Bioshock Infinite. Anyway, so I think that touched on most of the stuff I wanted to sort of poke at. I guess there's also maybe some things about erasing memories, like intentionally, you could poke at, but I didn't get much good as far as research there. Just that it's something people have sort of looked at. It's like, let's say we have like a drug addict and they're only finding themselves relapsing when they run into objects or situations that remind them of their, when they were on their drug habit previously. So if they could figure out a way to sort of remove that specific, association in their brain, like in a very mechanical sort of fashion, maybe we could help them prevent them from having a relapse or something like that. But still, very basic research is, barely there. So,
well, since memories are like an emergent system of a bunch of interconnected parts, the only thing we've ever been able to reliably do is kind of blank out the last 15 to 20 minutes or so, usually via like an electric shock or something, or specific drugs that prevent you from forming memories during the time period where you're on them.
Like a whole bunch of alcohol.
Yeah, that's a different thing. I hadn't gotten to that part of the Sachs book that I was skimming through.
There has been, also thinking about, it's like, okay, maybe we can like rewire the neurons, but we're not very good at even knowing what they're doing generally. So probably not a good idea to do.
Then we can't anyway.
It's also to experiment with that sort of thing is highly unethical. So, it's like, well, if we break something, sorry, it's now broken forever.
And there's even some question, given how the implicit emotional memory and the procedural memory don't seem to have anything to do with the episodic memory, whether the stuff we're doing to blank out episodic memory has any effect on the other memories, which is kind of troubling when you're talking about something like surgery.
Yes. So it's kind of, we don't know enough about how things actually work to really be in a position to, once again, even ask the right questions about what we should be doing here. So maybe erasing memories is kind of a moot point right now. So yeah, don't have to go into the ethics of that then. Hooray!
Yeah, is it ethical to remove someone's memories? Would it be ethical to remove someone's memory of being a drug addict? Because it would prevent them from relapsing? But then they don't, I don't know, maybe the same things would happen again because they don't remember them and can't avoid them in the future.
Yes, they have lost the memory of their drug addiction, so they don't know how terrible it was. They fall right back into it. Oh, God.
Also, I don't want to get into this tangent again, but that is such a gross misunderstanding of how drug addiction functions or where it comes from or the purpose it is serving for the people who are doing it. Let's stop it.
So it's a whole mess. And this sort of thrust of things of editing memories for that purpose is kind of the whole, it's a pile of cards that have already kind of fallen apart.
Well, that gets into your whole, is it ethical to alter someone's memories so they don't remember a horrible past trauma they went through? Because who would say no to that, but is it right to do? And what does it say about the horrible thing itself? If you can make people not remember it, does the horrible thing matter anymore?
It's like, oh yes, now my life is perfect because I don't remember that horrible thing anymore. So it's okay for you to have horrible things happen to people now?
Yeah, it doesn't matter if horrible things happen to anyone because you can just make them forget them, so who cares?
That kind of sucks.
There's a lot of weird little moral implications you get into with this stuff.
But don't worry, we'll have some Next Generation episodes to cover some of this, I think.
Yeah, I think so. It's probably, we've rambled on to other random tiny points long enough that it's going to get over to the galaxy's favorite game show!
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Galaxy's favorite game show, and there's some creepy guys out my window. They're just kind of floating there, but I think they're here to watch the show, so it should be fine.
This isn't Welcome to Night Vale.
At least I hope not. So we got some contestants who have been racking up a few points again here, and we got some winners to be getting some prizes here. So our first one is the Hard Drive Brain Prize, which goes out to all the humans in the city because they've had their heads completely rewritten, apparently, like many times over. Also to Mr. Hand for getting the same treatment and having Mr. Murdoch on his mind. What do they win collectively, Gepwin?
They all win some solid state storage, because I think this whole liquid-based thing that wound up spilling everywhere and losing everyone's memories wasn't a great idea.
True. Because now there's a whole soup of memories down here, and like, if you drink it, maybe you'll think you were the circus entertainer who was also a stockbroker.
I should have just done a freezer, because if you have a liquid and you put it in a freezer, it becomes solid-state storage.
There you go. Let's give these people a freezer. Speaking of chilly people, our second and third prize go to the same group of people, the Puppet Masters and One Mind, One Purpose prizes, which goes to the Strangers for using the dead as vessels and also orchestrating that whole city's existence and creating it and stuff like that, but also for that whole group memory thing. What do they win, Gepwin?
They win a rewrite of The Walking Dead, because that series ran itself to the ground, but this is a much better way to do zombies. Hive mind zombies seem like something we haven't done enough with.
Yeah, they're all organizing and slowly shambling around, and then they collectively see, there's fresh meat over there, and so they all turn at the same time and go, hi! Our fourth prize here is the Destruction of the Self prize, which goes to Dr. Schreiber for erasing everything about himself other than his skills as a psychologist. What does he win, Gepwin?
Dr. Schreiber wins another therapist. They are going to need more than one in this town. He's the only one who remembers all the horrible things that he did. So
he might need some help here. So, Dr. Schreiber, I guess it's time to start educating some people about psychology then. Our next prize is the Reluctant Messiah prize, which goes out to John Murdoch for not even knowing who he is, let alone how he's supposed to change the world. Jeepers, man. I'm just a guy. What does he win, Gepwin?
He wins some carpentry skills and a bush that's on fire and maybe one of those shepherd crook things. Can we get any more religious iconography in here? Like, he already had the Jesus pose thing for a bit.
Yeah, because it was all the table was all like arms out and legs down, and then you kind of like, well, I'm going to like rise again for the table here.
Yeah, can we start using something that's not the Jesus pose? It's getting played out, and there's a lot of other messiahs.
Yes. In fact, even in Judeo-Christianism, there is other messiahs that are mentioned at various points there. Anyway, our last prize is the Children of the Damned prize, which goes out to the creepy Mr. Sleep, because who the heck opts to use a dead child as your body as you walk around and be creepy at people? Sorry, jeepers. Gepwin, what does this abomination win?
They want a hotel, the tricycle and things, because they're twins, so come play with us in our dark city.
I'm scared, Gepwin. Take us away, please.
Yes, thank you, all of our horrible undead contestants. Grab some disinfectant on your way out.
Wipe down. Wash your hands, people.
And thank you all for joining us on the Galaxy's favorite game show.
Woo! Yay! Woo, I'm exhausted.
All right, we were talking about Mr. Sleep a little bit ago. It was like they're the kid and they're the small one, but they basically don't say anything. They like keep saying single word sentences and just making weird noises. So they had like just a little bit of the consciousness left over, and they're just like, I don't know, put it in the tiny one. You always get that one little bit left over. Just grab a small one.
Yeah, it's just excess here. You know, it's fine. You're small. It's small. It works out. But also, I didn't even mention the teeth clacking that it occasionally, and including Mr. Sleep. It's like,
Yeah, they didn't know. I don't know. They didn't know what they wanted to do with some of these characters. Why was Mr. Sleep biting people?
Mr. Sleep's kind of creepy. I know I keep saying creepy, but it's true.
All right. Well, next week we get to move on to a different kind of creepy.
Oh, no.
We're going back to Star Trek with an episode called Requiem for Methuselah.
Wait, Methuselah finally died?
Maybe? Yeah.
Okay.
So, I mean, yeah, as the name, they meet Methuselah, because he's an immortal alien, because of course he is.
They're going to keep running into immortals for the rest of the series, aren't they?
Yeah, and as far as I've been able to tell, because I haven't seen this episode, but I've heard of it, Kirk falls in love with his wife. That seems to be basically the entire thing.
Whoops. Kirk, can you learn how to maybe, I don't know, keep it in the pants?
No, that wouldn't be Kirk. Kirk's not Kirk who's doing that.
True. I don't know. Maybe McCoy could fall in love again. I know it was novel that one time, but come on.
Yeah, somebody else could. I mean, they're just taking, like, basically all they're doing when they write other romances on this show is taking the word Kirk and changing it out for McCoy or Scotty.
It still is awkward.
It's not like anybody else, like, does anything different or treats people any better.
Kind of cookie cutter. Anyway, that's next week on Watchers of Tomorrow.
You know, we've only got 6 episodes of this left.
Holy smokes, what are we going to do then?
That's a problem for future us. Are they even the same people? Who knows?
I don't know. I haven't got my forehead syringe yet today, so, you know.
Okay, yeah, back up. Put it in the fridge. And we'll see what kind of weird Christian-y something or other weird stuff they're doing with this one next week on Watchers of Tomorrow.
Next time on Watchers of Tomorrow... This isn't Forbidden Planet. You have been listening to Watchers of Tomorrow, a podcast on science fiction media. Find and follow Watchers of Tomorrow on Podbean, YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Pocket Cast, Spreader, Digital Podcast, and perhaps many more to come. If you enjoy our podcast, make sure to subscribe for more. And where possible, make sure to rate your experience or leave us a review. You may find Gepwin on youtube.com/Gepwin and Twitter @Gepwin. You may find me, Dr. Isix, on youtube.com/Dr. Isix and Twitter @IsixLP. Music is Waveform and Maury's Principle, both by DRKRN. You can also check out the Watchers of Tomorrow Discord channel. Make sure to share the experience with your friends, family, enemies, and alien overlords. If you feel you are suffering from transporter syndrome, please be aware that the next time you step off the transporter, that you, that is now, no longer exists.